What's up, everyone? It's Ryan. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. I hope you guys are doing well during this quarantine sort of period of our lives. It's definitely new to me. I'm working from home remotely 100%. Trying to be productive in that area. But what's also been cool is like I got an extra hour of time that I would not have if I had to commute, basically. So I've been just banging away at pedals, building pedals, finishing pedals that I started, and it seems like there's a lot of interest out there and a good time for folks to start learning about something new, picking up a new hobby, or spending that time to be productive in your own way. And some folks have been reaching out to me, and I think it's a long overdue topic on part selection when it comes to pedals. Getting into pedals is one of the easiest ways to get into like soldering techniques. It's not that expensive. You can build a really nice clone for like 34 bucks, and have the privilege of making it yourself. So I think that's really cool. That's a great way to step, and then as you progress, you can build amps like the ones behind me. Basically, my progression started off with pedals, specifically a clone from Aeon Electronics and a Blues Breaker clone. Those are two pedals that are very expensive. And then I just built them. I learned about them. I made some mistakes, and mistakes are okay. I'm going to share with you what I wish I had initially. So get your notebooks. We're going to go over some part selection and how to look at a circuit board, order a circuit board online, read the documentation, and how to order the parts. And I'm going to sort of give you the basic 3 levels, right? So new, basic, this is going to be tried and true, one of the best, sort of an in the middle approach for part selection, and then a truly vintage sort of vibe. It's not going to be the lowest noise, but it's going to sort of cater to the vibe of like a vintage sort of feel. So modern, hybrid, and then a vintage. Starting off, and I've been looking at sort of some inspirations, right? So starting off with the ultra modern, this is a Snouse Electronics black box. Look at that part selection in here. He's got polyester caps, the metal film, which is blue, resistors. So I'm going to talk about that in extension in quite a bit. And then the capacitors here, the electrolytics. Capacitors are nice audio grade electrolytics. So we have that. And then contrasting that with something that I'm currently building, which is more like the vintage vibe. This is a Mesa Boogie Flux drive, and the capacitors and everything is sort of a vintage. I would say it's a hybrid at this point because I'm using modern polyester caps here, and with carbon film resistors. Now that's going to be a little bit noisier, but the Tube Screamers and the Tube Screamer reissues are all carbon film resistors, remember, and that's really high up there. So we have 2 different sort of approaches, and then as a hybrid, we have a clone here. And this clone has, you'll see, metal film resistors, electrolytic capacitors, polyester caps in the smaller nanofarad. We have a tantalum capacitor in here, metal film, carbon film resistors in places that are critical. So there's the spectrum, right? We got the ultra modern Snouse. We have the clone, and then we have, just because I'm off the rails, sort of a vintage vibe, audio path, sort of not going for audiophile, but going for something smooth in the guitar world. So let's start off with something that's very black box related and go from there, because I think there's a lot about this Blues Breaker circuit that can sort of cater to all 3 of those stages, if you will. So starting off, we have the Parthenon Overdrive. This is a circuit board that is basically a Wampler Parthenon, which is kind of cool that this circuit board is available for you. So Pedal PCB, great site. I've been using them a lot. I'm not sponsored by them. There's a build doc. So let's open the build doc here. And first thing you're going to notice is that there is a circuit board sort of layout here, R13, R14, blah, blah, blah. Those are resistors. You see these boxes. Those are box film capacitors. This hole right here is for this toggle switches, and these circles are capacitors. IC is chips, so those are your op amps. And then here's your LED and more box film stuff. And these, presence control, that's where your, basically that's where your pots are going to go. So let's just dive into what's on the left-hand side, which is your resistors. And what I strongly suggest, and I'm even using them almost exclusively now, is Tata Electronics. I know that basically all the parts that are compatible with this circuit board can be found on Tata Electronics website. Already, like so as far as the box film capacitors are 5 millimeters lead spacing, and that's basically all they have on this site. So the site complements it very well. And so, for example, we're going to go down here, and we're going to notice that right off the bat, quarter watt. Pay attention to this because not all circuit boards are quarter watt. Some require eighth watt. So going for very basic, again, we're going to start off with the ultra modern approach. All these resistors should be metal film, and that's going to give you the theoretical lowest noise and all the rest. So we're going to go down to, I don't have my glasses on, so bear with me here. Resistors, metal film, quarter watt. They make it super easy to order, by the way. So save time, and basically here is the list of all the resistors they offer, and if there's any out of stock, they will tell you. What you're going to do is print this page out and just tally up. I have a 1K, I have 1 mega ohms. If you see anything that says R next to it, that just means like 220R means 220 ohms. And if it says like 6K8, that means 6.8K. So when we're on this page, I like to go a little lazy, 6.8, and that gives me 6.8 ohms, not what we're looking for, but there's 6.8K. You have to add everything in multiples of 10. So for 12 cents, I now have 10 of those resistors. If you start building up pedals and pedals, you are going to end up with a bunch of resistors, and likely you're going to not need some at some point. So very cool. So just go, for the ultimate sort of noise floor ratio, modern, sort of like what Black Box does, Snouse, all metal film. It's going to be tight tolerance, 1% tolerance versus 5%. And that's the way to go. All right, so now let's just say you wanted to do something kind of like the Klon approach, do a little bit of a hybrid. It's going to require a little bit more reading into the schematic. So here we are, schematic. I'm going to rotate clockwise, and I'll try to describe this the best I can. But anything in line, so you see this 1K resistor is a signal on the left and a signal on the right. It doesn't go up to V reference or VCC, kind of like what we see down here. It is a signal path. The resistor is, the signal is going through the resistor. This would be a good candidate for carbon film resistor in theory. And then this resistor down here, which is an impedance resistor, going to ground, that is something that you would be interested in putting a metal film, because you want the lowest noise floor that you get with metal film, and you want it to be stable, basically, and tight tolerance. That's the way you do that. Now you start getting into things up here. I would consider this all in the signal path. So all of those should be carbon film, including this, so specifically this. I'll start training your eye. And then on the power side, all of this should be metal film, so the blue kind. Anything in here. So, for example, this R101, we order a 10K, for example. We know that that's metal film. We're going to go up to our diagram here and look for R101 and place the resistor in that spot. So wherever it is, here it is. So we're going to add the resistor to the metal film to R101. And then not to be confused with the other ones, R12, wherever that is going to be carbon film. So that's going to be the tan color. If you want to go vintage, just basically flip-flop the beginning recommendation of metal film and just make all of these carbon film. And that would be sort of kind of like what my approach is on this one, sort of vintage vibe. Just go for it. Don't even think twice. If you really want, you can measure each resistor to see which one comes close to the value it's supposed to be. But that's going to take a long time, and you can do that if you'd like. All right, so now let's talk about capacitors. You are going to need capacitors. And then on the capacitors, we see picofarad, microfarad, nanofarad. I do recommend that if you're unsure, there's two ways of ordering. So see how it says 10N? If you go on Tata's website here, just go all the way to the top and then type in 10NF for nanofarad, or if it would work if you just did N. And then that's going to pull up all the capacitors for 10NF. So these are 10NF. Even if you're not sure, you can always go in Google and type 0.01 UF2 NF, and usually you get like a nice chart of sorts conversion, so you know with confidence which one is the right one. I do recommend if they have a value in the WEMA caps, those are the ultimate, those are the best. All right, and if you want to go for more of a vintage vibe, you can use these ceramic discs. I don't personally like those. I try to use WEMA polyester film caps, box caps, anywhere I can. The brand WEMA is a known sort of household brand for being the best. Tata has a couple lesser known brands out there that cost a little bit less. They work just as fine. So if they don't have WEMA, definitely go for the other kind. So that's what I have to say about that. How do you know, as you're looking through here, we get up to like 4.7 UF. And we're going to have a few options. So let me type in 4.7 UF. 9 times out of 10, anything over 1 microfarad is going to be a electrolytic. That's the cylinder type that you see here, the cylinders. 9, and then most of the time that's for the power circuit, but sometimes you'll see, and I don't know if there's a good example in this circuit, basically a decoupling capacitor. And I've had a few people reach out to me about, hey, Ryan, how do I know? And there's one right there, 4.7 UF, decoupling capacitor. And what that does is basically take the DC and takes any sort of sine wave or signals riding on DC. So let's just say it's all at 1 volt, up. It's never negative. It's always plus, 1 down to like 0.9 volts up to 1.2. Then this decoupling capacitor, anything after that, will take the signal and bring it right at 0. So you go plus volts and then negative volts, plus volts, negative volts. That's what basically that purpose of that capacitor is. You see here that this symbol is for electrolytic, and that's fine. If you want to go for like the vintage sort of vibe, I would suggest that. If you see this symbol here where it's double lines, that means that it's best suited for a polyester film cap, not a cylindrical capacitor. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to see that in the circle sort of pattern. You can, if you want to get creative, there's been a big sort of this is an MLCC, or monolithic multi-layer, ceramic capacitor. There's been a lot of progress in making those pretty high value, small space. That 4.7 might be interesting because that's going to give you the lowest distortion. One of the downsides to those capacitors, the electrolytics, is that in that circuit when it's doing this decoupling, is that it's really meant for a positive and a negative. And there's some distortion when the signal goes in an opposite direction, sort of in the negative, basically taking that capacitor and it's positive, negative, but then we're running like a negative voltage through the positive and the positive voltage through the negative, and it's not good for a signal integrity. So if you really want to go modern, I would suggest that you, anywhere that there's that symbol, grab one of those MLCCs, one of these, and that would basically be the most superior tone signal integrity that you can get. For vintage vibe, just go with any of these electrolytics. If I do not recommend tantalum unless your circuit absolutely needs it. One of those would be the tube screamer. If you want to go full on tube screamer, how that was designed, that uses a tantalum capacitor in the circuit. Just pay attention, do some research. And then there's basically, you don't need 400 volts. Just go with anything 50 volts, 16 volts, as long as there's no voltage doubler circuit, like a Klon. But generally, if you're at 25 volts or higher spec for that electrolytic, you're good. And the lead spacing is appropriate. So yeah, so two symbols like this means polyester. This symbol over here, if you want to get, basically crazy with it, go with a multi-layer ceramic. And then down here on the power side, this I would recommend just sticking with electrolytics. This is basically tried and true. You see 100 UF. You're not going to see that in a multi-layer or a monolith. So go for that. One of the other things, make sure you always don't forget the stomp switch. Tata has those too. I prefer the black stomp switches. So basically hardware. We have the stomp switches. So wherever the switches are, I'm just not seeing them right now. But let's check this out. Drilled enclosures for pedal PCB. Although there's not exactly one right here for the Parthenon overdrive, there are enclosures that are already pre-drilled for you, so which is pretty cool. So let's just say here's a yellow drilled enclosure for pedal PCB 3-knob type 1. Well, which ones are compatible? Well, on Pedal PCB's website, here is some basically tags for the circuit boards, which is pretty cool. What you're going to be looking for, and I want to say that the Tube Screamer, let's see, little green, is one of the ones that is compatible with that one I just chose. Yep, 3-knob type 1. So over here, we will go to 3-knob type 1. This is compatible. It'll be already pre-drilled for you. You're good to go. Very cool. So we covered the enclosures. LEDs, don't forget the LEDs. You can choose whatever you want. So Tata has the LEDs. You're going to need jacks. So here's something that you're going to need. So jacks. There's a bunch of options for you, and that's going to be way too much. So I'm going to go hardware. I think it's under hardware. And then, whoops. Enclosures. Oh, plugs and jacks. Here we go. All right. So Carl Lumberg is the best ones you can buy. They're also the most expensive. So it depends on what you want to do. I'm finding amazing quality at a great price. This one right here, excuse me. The stereo phone jack. These really hold the connections in very well, and the price is perfect. So it's really up to you. If you can afford it, go with the Carl Lumberg, and I prefer these right now because also the stereo, there's a shortening jack, and you can actually ground the input jack, which is pretty cool. So if you unplug the input, it will ground the signal for the rest of the path. So let me just turn that off. All right, so we covered jacks. The last thing you're going to need, besides stomp switches, is the DC power. There's also Lumberg jacks for that if you really want to get crazy. But the jacks, the power jacks for those pre-drilled enclosures is this one right here. It's smaller. It's a very tight fit. If you go with anything else, you may run the risk of needing to drill them out, which is something that you should get familiar with anyway, and just go for it there. Now, as far as, let's see here, as far as potentiometers, okay, I like to do just a copy and paste. So if I got 100K, B100K, let's go here. B100K. This site's pretty good about filling in what it thinks you are asking for. Since all of these are right mount, right angle mount, this is this sort of type you want. Also pay attention to what type of knobs you want, because see this right here, 6.3 mm. That's important because if you go over to hardware and then knobs, you're going to see that there's different size knobs, different type of knobs, and different sort of ways to mount the knobs on the potentiometers. So some of these are push-on, like your guitars, and then others have a set screw. And then there's also, see how this is 6 millimeter? That will not work with the 6.35 millimeter, which is a 1/4 inch pots. So you have to be careful there. One of the last things I'm going to mention is that besides all the diodes you can also find on Tata Electronics, is for the circuits, for the chips themselves, highly, highly, highly recommend that you get, let's see, Millimax, if they call it that. Okay, so we're back in action. Basically, for the chips, I strongly recommend that you use these machine-tooled IC sockets, and then the one that you need is the one that however many pins. So we're going to go back up to the circuit board up here. Count with me. See this little notch? On the left-hand side, the upper left, is pin 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, scroll right over, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that is an 8-pin IC. We're going to be going on here over and finding an 8-pin, here we go, tooled IC socket. So that's the one you want. And that's basically what you solder first, and then you just plug in the chip afterwards. If you want to experiment with different chips, that's the way to do it without having to unsolder and just make a mess and potentially ruin everything. That's about it. I really hope that you guys find this useful. I got a ton of questions about part selection and, which ones do you use bipolar. Oh, maybe I didn't touch upon that. Bipolar capacitors. So we saw in the circuit board where I said about using potentially the MLCC in this spot, or a electrolytic, just straight up electrolytic. Another thing you can use is a bipolar capacitor. It's going to be slightly bigger than your normal electrolytic, but what that is going to be able to, basically it's bipolar. There's no right or wrong the way you orient it. The signal is going to be a little bit more, have a better integrity in this spot as a decoupling capacitor. So basically you have 3 choices. You can go with a solid MLCC, those yellow ones, ceramic. You can go straight up regular electrolytic, which is going to be the cheapest, or you can go bipolar or non-polarized. There's a few different ways, capacitors in the spot, and they're all going to sound great. They're basically from the hi-fi side of things, you're at the MLCC. If you're at the standard lo-fi pedals, just your regular electrolytics that are 5 cents each, maybe even a penny. That is the long and short of it all. I love seeing these pedals as inspiration for my next adventures and journeys in pedal building. And I hope you guys find that's very useful, and I hope you're all staying safe, and picking up a new hobby. This is a really cool one. Feel free to reach out in the comments. If I missed something, I probably said something that wasn't appropriate. I'll do the best I can with editing, but rewind this, watch this 5 times, bring your notebook, and I'm pretty confident that you're going to have great pedal building days ahead of you. So for now, take care.